So the new RAM is installed, and I try to run a bunch of benchmarks with the new RAM and the old RAM, as there's a slight difference in latency between the two RAMs. So the ones that we have now, you know, this new one, this is actually the slightly better RAM in terms of latency, especially because I am on Ryzen. I'm on 2nd gen Ryzen, so I've got a 2700X CPU in there, and generally that kind of CPU will benefit from having lower latency RAM. And in this case, this RAM is running at 14/14/14/28. I've actually managed to tighten the timings up ever so slightly more within the BIOS, and surprisingly enough, nothing crashed, and the system's been really stable running 14/14/14/28. Whereas the previous RAM we had in there was also running at 3200 MHz, and we also had 32 gigs of RAM, but instead of running at, you know, pretty low cache latencies, that one was running at like 16, 18, 18, 36, something along those lines. So we've had a little bit of an improvement in terms of RAM latency, which theoretically we should see, you know, hopefully an improvement in real world performance, or at least in benchmarks, as I tried to run TimeSpy and I also ran Firestrike to kind of get some numbers, and I ran these tests with the old RAM and the new RAM all set to, you know, their best possible latencies in a way. And the new RAM, there was a slight improvement in terms of CPU score, especially when I ran TimeSpy. So I'll put the numbers up on screen right here. I think there was only around a 250 point difference, which could partially be down to margin of error. But for the most part, I would say there was definitely an increase in FPS across pretty much every single metric that I measured when I upgraded the RAM. So everything was slightly better, but only by a tiny little bit. I've not seen any kind of crazy performance increase when using the PC day to day. Nothing's really been impacted that much. I will say the PC does feel a little bit snappier, but that could be down to possibly me updating the BIOS, as my BIOS, believe it or not, was I think a year or two out of date, which isn't good. And the RAM actually didn't even work, as I did a live stream where I actually installed all the RAM whilst live streaming to YouTube, and nothing was working for a little while, so I had to update my BIOS, and then the RAM worked fine. So bear that in mind. If you get this RAM, make sure your BIOS is up to date, as this is using some crazy RGB technology that maybe requires a BIOS update. I don't know, but you know, it's probably a good idea to update your BIOS anyway. Don't use an out-of-date BIOS, because my PC, before this new RAM and the new BIOS, things were surprisingly unstable. Well, maybe not surprisingly. They were unstable probably because I had a freaking out-of-date BIOS, but my PC I think still has a tiny problem, mainly with Adobe Premiere, and I'm pretty sure I'm gonna just reinstall Windows, because it's been a while since I've reinstalled Windows on this PC. So perhaps, you know, things have kind of, you know, gotten a bit corrupted here and there, because I've got this weird bug, yeah, where, it's gonna sound so silly, but whenever I right click on, let's say, a folder on the left hand side in Explorer, I'll put up a picture or something, so whenever I would right click on a folder, Explorer itself crashes, Explorer.exe full on restarts. So if you're doing any kind of file transfer and you right click on a folder, GG to your file transfer, that's gonna get cancelled, and Explorer.exe will restart. For what reason? I don't have a clue, man. I don't know why it's doing this to me, but I've had many instances where I'm transferring files to my server and I right click on a folder and everything freaking restarts. So very fun times living with this PC. From what I've noticed, using my PC now, things kind of seem a little bit snappier. There's a little bit less wait time, which could possibly be associated with the new RAM, but probably the combination of new BIOS plus new RAM maybe has kind of sped things up a little bit in my PC. But in terms of actual FPS improvement on this CPU and my graphics card, I didn't really see much of a difference going from cache latency 16 to cache latency 14, and even tightening up the timings even more. I didn't see any kind of crazy drastic improvement, nor was I really expecting one, but it was kind of interesting to try to measure what kind of improvement there was in the first place. But in terms of TimeSpy, that one actually did see a 250 point increase on the CPU score, which is most likely because of the slightly faster RAM. But as for everything else, there was a little bit of an FPS increase in Firestrike. The low latency RAM across the board got slightly better FPS as opposed to the slower latency RAM, but it was by such a small amount that you would, probably never notice this kind of thing ever in like real world performance. Like you're not going to notice half a frame difference. But if you are after the most stable system, the snappier system, and every bit of FPS matters to you, if you're buying a second gen Ryzen CPU, let's say the 2700X, I would probably recommend, yeah, why not? Try to get your hands on, lower latency RAM. Anyway, that's pretty much the performance covered about the RAM. What do I actually think of the way it looks? Now, it does look very, very different in person as opposed to what they put on the packaging. So this is how the RAM actually looks like inside of the PC. Now, I feel like this would look much, much better in a PC build where there wasn't already crazy amounts of RGB lighting all over the place, especially if you have like a 24-pin RGB cable right next to this T-Force addressable RGB RAM. It almost kind of steals all the spotlight away, these cables do, from the RAM. But the RAM itself, I would say, actually looks very nice. It's just that it's not very bright in terms of the LEDs and everything. Like, it's not the brightest thing on earth, so it doesn't stand out very much. It's a lot more stealthy. So if you're building a PC build perhaps, where you maybe want a little bit of RGB lighting, this is actually like very nice RAM to go for, but it's nothing like in your face in terms of actual RGB LED effects. The lighting on the RAM, I would say, is really smooth, but as you can see, when it's next to something like an RGB 24-pin cable, the spotlight is kind of stolen away from the RAM, but they have done a good job on making the LED lighting effects look very clean and, in a way, maybe professional. Like, it doesn't look cheap in any way. That's kind of what I'm trying to get at. The RAM itself like feels high quality and looks like high quality RAM. It doesn't look cheap in any sort of way, mainly because the finish of the RAM is got like a LED mirror finish, I suppose, and it looks nice, man. It looks really high quality, nice. And the RGB implementation on the RAM, it's nothing over the top as opposed to the previous RAM we had in there. That one like actually stood out a lot. This one's a lot more stealthy, you know what I mean? Also, here's a little trick for all the people that are using Aura Connect. Head over to services, and if it's not running already, press start and that will resume the service. And I think if we go on connect devices, okay, ASUS is indeed here. Now I've got my camera pointing directly at the RAM. Now we can try and mess around with the lighting effects a little bit. So I moved ASUS Aura next to the PC build right here so that they actually match up in terms of colors. But this should give you somewhat of a better idea of like how the RAM itself looks like in terms of RGB lighting. It's nothing insane, it's nothing crazy over the top, but it looks nice, man. It looks like very clean RGB lighting. That's kind of what I gotta say. It's nothing crazy though, nothing crazy. So that's kind of been my video about the T-Force addressable RGB XTREEM RAM. In terms of performance and stuff, I'm very happy with the RAM. Slightly lower latency. With the previous RAM that was in there, I did try to tighten up the timings a little bit, but I didn't have any sort of luck whatsoever. Whenever I would do that, the PC would just become extremely unstable, sometimes not even boot anymore. So with this new RAM, in terms of, overclockability, I suppose, your chances, at least from my experience, maybe I just got lucky here, are probably a little bit higher. And the fact that I was even able to drop the last timing, which I think by default is running at around 34 or 32, somewhere in this range, and I was able to drop it all the way down to 28. So a little bit better timings, and overall I'm pretty happy with the RAM. In terms of performance, so far the PC has been more stable than ever, apart from like the odd few Windows bugs here and there. But apart from all that stuff, I have ordered a new RGB cable, an RGB splitter cable for the SSD that we're going to be putting inside of the PC. So look out for that one. But apart from that, guys, thank you all so much for watching. That has been my video about TeamGroup's lovely new RAM. It's going to be staying as part of the PC build. It definitely looks quite nice. But anyway, guys, I'm going to get going. Thank you all so much for watching. A link in description down below in case you want to go pick up the RAM or the SSD. And stay tuned for the next video, which will be about our new RGB SSD, also from TeamGroup. But I gotta wait until my cable arrives so we can sync up all the RGB lighting and of course control the SSD's RGB lighting within Razer Synapse, as that is definitely what we want to do. But yeah, guys, thanks for watching once again. Hope to see you in another video soon.